Okay, today my guest is Professor Sarianna Lundan, and I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with her. In the next 30 minutes, we'll talk about Sarianna as a person. Professor Lundan is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. And Sarianna is the inaugural editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Business Policy, and studies the interplay between governments, regulations, and M&Es. So thank you, Sarianna, for joining us, and let's start.
Perfect. Thank you for having me.
So first, what did you want to become when you were a child?
I think my first clear sort of career goal, I wanted to be an archaeologist. Not entirely sure why. It's not as if I was taken to Egypt or something and I decided that, but this was a very clear idea. Along with being an archaeologist, I did have the idea of being some kind of a professor fairly early on. But I have to say that this was not particularly promoted by my parents. So my dad, actually, he's a nuclear physicist. He has a PhD, but was never that keen on academia. My mother is a dentist and an orthodontist, and she also thought, yeah, something more practical, business, something that would be something. So it's not as if they were pushing me in that direction, but I had that idea that I would be first an archaeologist and secondly a professor fairly early on.
Wow. So can you pinpoint the earliest moment of awareness between domestic versus foreign?
Yes, because I grew up in Finland, and at that time, so we're talking about the early 70s, Finland was quite isolated from the rest of Europe. So we were really in our own little corner there. And of course, I wasn't aware of that as long as I stayed there, but my parents were quite keen on travel. So they took me, I was an only child, and so I was kind of easy to take along. And so they took me on travels, first to Stockholm, not very far, but different. People look different. You know, there were actually people, not non-Scandinavians in Sweden at that time, which we really did not have in Helsinki, where I was born. And then the other part of it was that then they took me to cities like London, and I was 7 or 8 years old, and there was no going back. I thought, yes, this is the big world. This is something that I want to take part in, and you could not stop me back in Finland anymore. My dad also, he worked for a Finnish mining company, so he was gone quite a big part of the year, but he did these 7 or 8 week long travels around the world. In those days, you know, just to go to the other side of the world took several days. And he would visit remote places because the mines just always happened to be in very remote places. So he was in Papua New Guinea, he was, you know, in China before it was in any way common. So very early 80s, early days, he was in Chile, he was everywhere where you have big mines. And he came back he took some slides and we watched them at home. So he took pictures with his camera and they were made into slides and we looked at those at home. So this was basically training. So by the time that it then ended up that I was studying in the US and I actually never returned to Finland after that, in my mind, I was sort of telling my parents, well, what did you expect? You know, you exposed me to this and you know, this was the result. So quite early on, I was aware of that.
It shows, yeah. So now about becoming IB scholar, how or when did you choose to be a scholar for international business?
Yeah, now the Zoom gremlin was there for a little while, but so the question was, how did I then end up with IB? It was a little bit of a coincidence. I can't say that this was specifically the plan. I studied at Rutgers in New Jersey because my dad, due to his job, was actually posted for a couple of years to New Jersey. And this was, I had just finished high school and I needed something to do before we were all due to return to Finland. So I started at Rutgers and I was studying finance. And then I kind of got into it and I got into economics. And I couldn't decide, is it political science? Is it economics? Is it finance? You know, what is it that really interests me? And then my parents left for Germany and I thought, I don't want to go to Germany. I will stay here and I will finish this degree and then I will see what I'll do. And when I had done that, I went back to Finland, but I had put in an application. I had really not thought about how I would fulfill this doctor professor ambition, but I did put in an application for Rutgers. So I was studying in New Brunswick, but in Newark, there was the Graduate School of Management. And I almost forgot about it. So I went back to Finland. I actually got a job with Microsoft, which would have taken me to a very different direction. I was due to go to Ireland to start to develop sort of software for the Scandinavian market and specifically for Finland. Then I had a couple of small health problems, which is unusual when you were 22. So they said, oh, no, just sort it out and we'll put everything on hold and you just tell us when you're ready to come. And, you know, half a year later, I was ready. But then I got the letter from Rutgers saying, yeah, so you could start your PhD at Rutgers Newark in the fall. And then I had to make a decision, you know, do I go to Ireland with Microsoft? I was so impressed by them. They were, you know, I was 22 years old and they were talking to me about, you know, career development and options and things like that. And I thought, oh, that's the big time. But then I still decided that I will follow the original plan. And so I went to Rutgers, but we said, okay, let's see if I can make this work financially. So Rutgers said they're not sure if I would be able to get a teaching assistantship, maybe. So I said, okay, let's try. And I have to say a little, not a plug for Microsoft, but I have to say that I was really impressed at that time because then they told me that, okay, it doesn't matter. So you go and try it out. If a year later you still are not totally sure, then, you know, we're here and you just come back and you pick up where we left off. So I thought that was an extraordinary commitment to make to someone who's 22 and really you have no idea what they will bring. So I started at Rutgers. And then it was really just kind of coincidence. I had a sense that they had someone coming in who was very famous and well known. This was, of course, John Dunning. But I didn't really know. I also knew that it dealt with all the things that the mixture that I was interested in. So economics, finance, and political science. So all these elements seemed to be in the mix. And then I thought, no, let me go and see if this is really, you know, if I'm correct about the path that I should take. And then I went there and then it turned out that I could get a teaching assistantship. I also got a scholarship from Finland. So I was paid for 5 years and I thought, okay, that's it. That decides it for me. So it was financed and it was ready to go. And then I kind of never looked back. So then it absorbed me.
It's so interesting that all these things are coming together at one point that, you know, we don't really start off with a plan in mind, but life unfolds in front of us. It's very interesting. So yeah, if you stopped doing what you're doing today, what would be your second best alternative career path?
You know, oh, you should have asked me 20 years ago. I think I'm too long in it. I'm too happy doing what I'm doing to really consider that I would have taken any other path. I sometimes think if I would and could have been happy with the Microsoft path that started out, I'm really not sure. I don't think I would have been a fantastic fit for the corporate world, and they probably would have figured that out before I did. So I'm very happy with this path. It's hard for me to even imagine that I would have done anything else. And like I said, I did have kind of a vision of doing something like this fairly early on.
I mean, I normally ask, what is the one thing you wish you would have done, but you didn't, and whether this was your biggest failure, what did you learn from it? Now here, the story basically unfolds for Microsoft for you, right? You know, there's an alternative life. Completely different dynamics, different mentality. Let me ask you, what are you most proud of in life?
I think I am proud of the big project that John Dunning and I did together. This was the 3 years of us working together on the second edition. It fulfilled all my sort of ambitions and dreams about wanting to really know about all these things. So I thought that personally that was the most satisfying. I think if I sort of ask the question of myself, really, what am I would have to say it's my son. I'm actually very proud of him. I think, you know, I can't take credit for him. He's his own person. He came into this world, you know, as a complete package. But I do have to say that nothing professionally quite compares with that feeling. But then again, they are very different categories. So I don't want to diminish either. So I feel that they are complementary. I feel that they contribute to a full life, but they are of equal value to me.
I see. Now let's switch gears and let's talk about Professor Lundan, about her research. Imagine you're stranded in a small village and you sought refuge in a small neighborhood pub. Locals are curious about who you are, what you do for a living, and how would you summarize your research to the audience? And if they ask you, why is this important, what would you say?
I would say that I'm interested in, so I would say, I would give a couple of examples and say, you know, there are these huge firms that have a lot of financial resources, they have a lot of intellectual resources, they create a lot of goods and services that all of us use and benefit from, but they also have really a kind of a heavy footprint on the world that we live in. And I see my job as investigating that footprint and then saying, how do we feel about some of these effects? There are good effects, there are bad effects. How should we better understand how we as society and large firms, so multinational enterprises, how do we get the best out of this cohabitation that we have?
I see. In your opinion, are there omitted variables in IB research?
I think in social science, you know, I always think of us as fish who are studying the aquarium live. So there's no way to get out of the aquarium, you know, very difficult to sort of take yourself out of it. So is there life beyond the aquarium? Of course there is. I think I'm not maybe as bothered as other people about that. I think that's an essential sort of aspect of doing social science research. I've actually been very encouraged in recent years. So of course, I'm interested in the institutional context and how firms are shaping the institutional context and vice versa, how they are shaped by it. There are always new things that we can look at. There are always new actors. There are always new goals that we have in society. And for that, we develop new institutions. But I wouldn't blame us for really not considering the sort of reasonably available suspects. That is speaking more at the macro level. On the micro level, yeah, I would have to think about it longer to really know the answer to that. On the macro level, no, I'm quite happy. I think we know where we need to look. We just need to do more really field research and research that uncovers new facts about the world.
How would you describe creativity in scholarship?
I think creativity is, there's so many aspects to it. I think it's daring to have a voice. And here we really get into some sort of philosophical questions about how far is social science science. So similar to what I just said about omitted variables, I'm not sure that being fish in the aquarium, we really can not have our own voice, not have our own movements influence how we see the environment. So every time I beat my tail as a fish, it moves the water, and you know that has an impact. So I think creativity is about acknowledging that you have that voice, being clear about what that voice and view on the world brings into your research, and then just trying to follow good practice. So I am not in the camp that says we are all just ships passing in the night and we can't have any shared reality at all. I don't think that. I think we can try to adopt really good scientific practice, describe what we are doing, describe what we are studying, being specific about variables, being specific about context and how it influences the variables, But ultimately, I don't really believe in social science that is somehow removed from the viewpoint of the person doing the observation.
Yes.
Yeah.
So based on my work with Aslı Arıkan on creation discovery, I like to ask these established scholars what their mind does when it wanders in a state of idle curiosity. So what does your mind think of when it wanders freely?
So I'm a person who I've really tried to cultivate idleness in my life, and that, you know, of course, these days people speak about it in more positive terms. I think I was trying to do it already when it wasn't fashionable, because I find that I can't get the kind of thinking and ideas unless I give myself enough room and without constraints. So what comes out of it? What comes out of it is a curious chain and combination linkages between things. I'm looking for patterns, of course. We all are looking for patterns, and I don't know how to describe what comes out. What comes out is sometimes something very unique. I think whatever my sort of contribution might be, I think it's in the area of really looking at quite a lot of things and then trying to find the common denominator, except that I don't really try to find it. It usually kind of jumps out at me. So I tend to see, when I'm done thinking, I tend to see things in quite plain terms. So when I feel like I've understood something is when I can actually strip it of all the context, all the extra thing, and say, well, that's just kind of like something else that I know, only with a different hat on. So, and usually when I feel that I've learned something, it's at that point. And that to me is a form of creativity. It's a synthesizing form of creativity. There are obviously different kinds, but that's where I feel that I have accomplished something. When I read quite a bit, I think, and then I say, okay, but I think I can put this on a postcard. Then I feel like I've gotten there.
Very interesting. I mean, you got this equilibrium in your mind. Everything is fitting very nicely. So a person who sees these things as a state of equilibrium, where do you see the IB research in the next 5 to 10 years? What's the next big thing for our field?
I think we can see the next big thing already. And here, of course, you know, we come back to the point that I speak from my point of view. I really can't leave that perspective. I see that the sustainability challenge, very broadly understood, is what is going to be fueling, or hopefully will be fueling, much of our research agenda. And by that, I mean a really broad interpretation where we are talking about the role of business in society, where we consider developed countries, developing countries, where we consider the changing demographics of countries, where we consider the environment naturally, but also urbanization, all these trends that, I mean, if you want a shorthand for it, that would be the Sustainable Development Goals. They cover all these areas. I think this is really a fundamental agenda for all of us, and it does touch on all the issues that I have been interested in my professional career. So I think this is mapped out for us. It also gets into some of the other big issues of inequality, anti-globalization, because a lot of the causes, when we, you know, sort of dig deeper, are in these processes that are linked to sustainability. So I find that that is the agenda, and I hope that will be. It certainly will be for me.
Is this what Journal of Business, not studies, but the policy side is going to be pursuing in the next 5 to 10 years mostly?
I think there will be more and more that we could, you know, again, the SDGs are an enormously broad set of issues. So that fits a lot of different topics, but I do see that as essential. Of course, there is this other more political dimension to the anti-globalization that we see at this moment. There is this politicization of economics and relations between countries. So we're moving away from kind of a free market economy driven exchange into a more politicized exchange. I think that is also an important issue that we need to pay attention to, that we need to study more. That includes, of course, the role of China, Belt and Road, all these other things. So that is there. But actually, even within those topics, the Belt and Road investments are ultimately about investments into infrastructure and development. They are also about sustainability. They are also about generating sort of conditions for economic growth and well-being. So it all kind of ties into that agenda. But at the moment, I would say that it's the sustainability agenda and then a refashioning of the politicized economic relations between countries. I mean, when I started in graduate school in 1991, you know, this was the height of this was when globalization, this wave really took off, and you almost couldn't imagine that there would be anything other than trade liberalization and investment liberalization, and this would just be a good thing. And I think most of us still believe that there is a lot of good that comes with it, but obviously the political environment has changed. And I think that is something that we do need to be engaged with. And of course, people already are, but it does shape the entire agenda that we do have to think about what we think about globalization and the limits that are attached to it.
Okay. If that is the future, I would like to ask your opinion about which IB questions are overly studied and these are less fruitful in your opinion.
You don't want me to be making enemies here. I think there are, you know, but that's really, it is unfair in a way, because again, your viewpoint comes into play. So automatically there are some issues about let's say institutional distance, for instance, that I'm not terribly keen on, but I can completely understand why in a certain kind of research, it really is kind of a practical compromise that you would use measures like that in order to study other things. So it's a little bit unfair of me to sort of look at that and say, well, we don't need any more of this. Yes, there are other areas. I think the entire focus on entry modes, entry modes are important. Whether we have so much new to say about that, I'm not completely convinced. But then again, these are not issues that I'm actively researching. So
thank you.
That may be somewhat unfair.
Now let's talk about the advice part and you as a mentor. When you were starting out, what do you wish that you had known, that you would have saved a lot of time, efforts, and you wouldn't be making a mistake if you'd just known that advice?
You know, I thought about that because you told me that you would ask that. And then I thought, actually, I have very little useful advice to give because I was so bad at taking advice. And this is not something that anyone should follow. So I think rather you should listen to people who give you advice. I was very resistant to taking advice. And that's not because I thought that I knew better, but it was rather that I always sort of pictured people in their own particular circumstances. And I couldn't quite see how that related to my specific goals and ideas. So you're really getting advice from someone who was always bad at taking and following advice. I would rather go in the wrong direction on my own accord than take reasonable advice. But if you are a person who takes reasonable advice, then I think one piece of advice I would have given my younger self is not to be greedy. And what I mean by that is not to be intellectually greedy. I wanted to sort of know everything and make sure that I had read everything and understood everything before I felt that I could say something about it. Now, obviously, this was an impossible agenda, and someone could have told me it's an impossible agenda, but I'm not sure that I would have listened. And this only leads to unhappiness, and it's not necessary. The career is relatively long and you can take questions one at a time. I would, however, advise that you do have an idea about where this path is leading. So spend enough time thinking about what the big goal is before you say, what are the smaller steps that will get you there? I was very focused on the big goal, the things that I really wanted to know. I was not very good about sort of sitting back and saying, yeah, fine, but let's take it one step at a time. And let's also kind of pay attention to all those constraints that are even more pressing today on the younger scholars in terms of where to publish, how much time to devote to which thing. So,
but this is important, you see, because if you label yourself as a person who doesn't take advice, and you have some reasons for not following advice, very logical, obviously, now that really puts you in a position to give very valuable advice to people like you, like younger versions of Sarianna in the field. And what is the advice or what are the skills that these people should have developed or should have acquired in the past going forward for a successful career like yours?
So these people who probably won't be listening because somehow they are not very good at taking advice, I would say you need resilience and you need to trust your own voice. So we come back to this issue of voice, in the sense that I don't think that it's a crime in social science to have a voice, to have a viewpoint, to have a sense of how you want to structure the world in your own mind. And I think you need to, the world in a way wants to take that away from you because it wants to break everything into very small pieces, and without really encouraging you to always make sure that you know where those pieces belong. So my advice would be, on one hand, what every editor would tell you, which is resilience. Don't be discouraged by the negative feedback. Do have the resilience to keep going, go to the second round, the third round. You're winning every round, that the paper goes forward. Incidentally, at JIBP, we try not to go past 2, but that's a separate issue. You need resilience. You need to be able to take rejection. You need to be able to be told that these ideas are not leading anywhere. And in spite of that, I would say, don't sell your soul to the devil. You're never getting it back. You do need to stick with the original idea, your voice, and if and when things turn out fine for you, then it's a satisfying place to be.
It is. So what is one question that I should have asked you but didn't, and you said this has to come off my chest? What would you ask?
You didn't ask me about my hobbies.
Okay, what are your hobbies?
Exhaustingly about all my music hobbies. I spent my entire childhood in all different kinds of doing all sorts of performances and whatnot. Nothing was more important than that. And I've continued it now. So I'm singing a bit, and I go to concerts a lot when we are not in the middle of a pandemic. That is really something I feel is missing in my life at the moment. I'm a huge opera fan. So this really, fortunately for everyone, I don't contribute by singing opera, so that I leave to others. But really my highlight, I have to say, was when I was a student at Rutgers, and I joined the oratorio choir because there was a professor who was coming in from Juilliard, a very well-known choral director who came as a visiting professor. And this happened to coincide with my undergraduate years in New Brunswick. So I auditioned and I got into the oratorio choir, and this was the highlight of my musical training. I've been spoiled ever since for every choir that I have been in.
What is the one single most important operatic piece that you've ever watched? You can only choose one. You can not give me a complete list of Italians or French. Just choose one. Which one would it be?
Okay, now you gave me a tough one. Which one would be the one that I would take on a desert island? Probably Traviata.
Wrong answer. Tosca. You should have said Tosca. That was the correct answer.
It's not. Tosca would have been up there. I would say though, Traviata. It reveals a lot about me. It's a little bit sappy. It's a little bit, but it for the beauty alone, yes, that works for me. I would take that one. But you're really asking me to leave a lot behind. So.
Thank you, Sarianna, for this very interesting and candid interview. I learned a lot, and I'm sure many will agree with me. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yes, so this is...
Good.
Hold on, please. Okay.